Jeff Hoffman just blew another save, and this time the guy who came in to clean up his mess did it in 3 pitches. Varland struck out Joey Ortiz, got out of the jam Hoffman created, then went back out and finished the 10th inning to secure the win. 10 games into the 2026 season, Varland still hasn't allowed an earned run. Not one. 15 strikeouts in 10 1/3 innings, and the Blue Jays are still handing the ball to Jeff Hoffman in the 9th. Let me ask you something. At what point does this become a real problem? Because Tuesday night in Milwaukee was not a one-off. It wasn't bad luck. Hoffman walked 3 batters, gave up 2 runs, left the bases loaded, and had to be pulled before the game was even over. And the only reason the Blue Jays escaped with a 9-7 win in 10 innings is because Varland came in and immediately erased everything Hoffman had done. 3 pitches, out of the inning, done. That's not a coincidence at this point. That's a pattern, and the Blue Jays front office knows it. Now here's what I want to get into today, because there's actually more going on beneath the surface than just a bad outing from a struggling closer. What happened Tuesday night might be telling us something about where this bullpen is headed, whether it happens this week, this month, or not until the situation becomes absolutely untenable. The writing is starting to appear on the wall. Let's start with Hoffman, because you have to be fair to him and look at the full picture. This is not a guy who can't pitch. Last season, he collected 33 saves. He was dominant through most of the postseason. 2 saves, 18 strikeouts, a 1.46 ERA across 10 appearances. When he's locked in, he's one of the nastiest arms in the game. The velocity is real. The stuff is real. But then there's Game 7, 2 outs away from a World Series championship for Toronto. Miguel Rojas steps in, and Hoffman gives up the home run that ties it. And yeah, I know that's one pitch, in one moment, and the Blue Jays still had chances after that, but you cannot separate a closer's identity from the moments that define them, and right now, Jeff Hoffman's identity in Toronto has a complicated layer to it that didn't exist a year ago. The blown save in the regular season stings. The blown save when you're 2 outs from winning the World Series, that lives in a different part of your brain. And then he comes into 2026 carrying that, and the ERA goes in the wrong direction. From 2.17 to 4.37 last year, the walks are up, the command is spotty. The roller coaster that fans were dealing with during the regular season last year hasn't leveled out. It's continuing right into April of this year. 3 walks in 1 appearance, not against the middle of a lineup. In a save situation, in the 9th inning, in a game the Blue Jays should have closed out clean. John Schneider keeps coming back to Hoffman publicly, keeps expressing confidence. And look, that's what a manager does. You don't yank your closer after a rough stretch without giving him a real runway, especially when there's no official announcement being made. Schneider understands optics, he understands clubhouse dynamics. You don't publicly undercut a veteran pitcher who's been your go-to guy and expect the bullpen to function normally after that. So the messaging makes sense, even if the results are making it harder and harder to justify. But here's the thing. Before this most recent blown save, Schneider actually acknowledged that Hoffman's struggles have made things difficult at times. That's not nothing. When a manager starts using language like that in the press, it's usually a sign that internal conversations are happening that fans aren't privy to. It's a subtle shift. It's the kind of language that precedes a move, not the language of a staff that's completely settled on their guy. So now we get to Varland, and this is where it gets really interesting. He came over from Minnesota at the 2025 trade deadline, and the results were mixed, to be honest. A 4.94 ERA over 23 regular season appearances. Postseason was slightly better at 3.94 across 15 outings. Nothing that screamed future closer. Nothing that made you look at him and say, this is the guy who's going to take the 9th inning and own it. He was a useful bullpen piece. Quality depth. But that was it. Something has clicked in 2026, 10 games in, and the numbers aren't just good, they're historically good for this early stretch. 0 earned runs allowed, 15 strikeouts in just over 10 innings. Hitters are not picking up his stuff. The arsenal is working at a completely different level than anything we saw from him last year. and the timing of it, coming right as Hoffman continues to struggle, makes every Varland appearance feel like a referendum on who should be closing. Tuesday night crystallized it in a way that felt almost scripted. Hoffman walks 3 guys, gives up 2 runs, gets pulled with the bases loaded. Varland comes in, 3 pitches, strikeout, inning over. Then he goes back out in the 10th and finishes it. You couldn't write a better argument for a closer change if you tried. And yet, here's where the reality of roster construction and bullpen management complicates what seems like an obvious decision on the surface. The closer role isn't just about who's the best pitcher in your bullpen, it's about how the rest of the unit functions around that designation. When you have an established closer, your setup guys know their job. Your 7th inning arm knows his job. The 8th inning guy knows his job. Everyone operates within a defined structure, and that structure creates efficiency, especially over a 162-game season when you're trying to manage workloads and keep arms fresh across 6 months. The moment you move Varland into the 9th, you're not just making one change, you're reorganizing the entire back end of your bullpen. Who becomes your 8th inning guy? Does that change how you use Yimi Garcia? Does it alter when you go to your other high-leverage arms? These are questions that have downstream effects on how Schneider manages a close game in the 6th or 7th inning, because the decisions you make early are informed by who you know you're going to when the game is on the line. There's also the question of what moving Varland to the 9th does to his workload and availability. Right now, he's pitching in high-leverage situations without the specific pressure of the closer designation. He's getting important outs, but the framing around his role gives the coaching staff flexibility in how and when they deploy him. Once you put someone in the 9th and call them the closer, the expectations change, the usage patterns change. A pitcher who's been electric in a setup role doesn't always translate that same level of performance once the save situation pressure and the label are attached. And then there's the Hoffman side of this. What do you do with him if Varland takes the 9th? Do you flip them and have Hoffman pitch the 8th? Does a guy with Hoffman's mentality and his recent history in the postseason respond well to being demoted within the same bullpen where he just blew a World Series save? These are human beings, not chess pieces, and the psychological dimension of this kind of move has real consequences for team cohesion if it's not handled correctly. The Blue Jays haven't made a move. Schneider hasn't announced anything. Hoffman is still the closer, at least officially. But Tuesday night felt like something. Not because of the result, the Blue Jays won after all, but because of the image it burned into everyone watching. One guy walking off the mound with his head down after loading the bases and giving up the tying runs. Another guy walking on to strike out the first batter he faced in 3 pitches and then go back out and close the door in extra innings. That contrast was impossible to miss. The question is whether the Blue Jays let it get to the point where a change feels reactive and desperate, or whether they get in front of it and make a calculated decision to transition the role now, while Varland is as locked in as he's ever been in his career. There's an argument for acting fast when you have a reliever pitching at this level. Elite stretches from bullpen arms don't always last the full season, and if you're going to make a move, you want to make it when your replacement is at peak confidence, not when they've cooled off and you're making the switch out of pure necessity. What I do know is this: the Blue Jays spent the offseason building a roster to compete right now. This is not a rebuild. This is not a team content to make the playoffs and exit in the first round. They were 2 outs away from winning the World Series last October. Every decision they make this season is filtered through the lens of finishing what they started. And if Jeff Hoffman keeps walking batters and Louis Varland keeps getting them out in 3 pitches, at some point the math becomes unavoidable, even for a manager who has been steadfast in his loyalty to his closer. It might not happen this week, it might not happen this month, but Tuesday night in Milwaukee looked a lot like a preview, and the Blue Jays front office is watching the same games we are.